Hello, fellow gays. Or, well, I'm assuming that you're queer since you clicked on this video and saw the title. I think it also might be safe to assume a few other things about you. I'm guessing that you're an artist of some kind. Maybe a musician, theater kid? Maybe you're a writer or a painter. Cosplayer? Filmmaker? Photographer? Makeup artist. There we go. Maybe your creativity is only limited to a few crochet projects, and that one time you went into a paint and sip art class. But either way, you still consider yourself a creative person. Am I wrong? Tell me in the comments below. Wait, no, please don't, because I haven't even begun to tell you why this connection even exists or why it's significant. The historical connection between creativity and queerness is long, but I'm going to start fairly recently, hopefully at a place that my entire audience remembers. Introduction. The 2010s was a contentious time for queerness. Tumblr was ruthlessly arguing about pronouns, BuzzFeed was baiting us all with "Am I gay?" internet quizzes, YouTubers like Ash Hardell and Milo Stewart were posting educational content that got endlessly memed and ridiculed. Oh yeah, and the Obama administration legalized gay marriage nationwide in 2015. There's that. So I graduated high school in 2018 and was raised from birth to be a good little heterosexual evangelical Christian good girl wife. And while I may not look it, needless to say, that's not what I turned out to be. Point being, everyone in the 2010s was talking about gays in both good and bad ways. My dad was always needling me about one of the guys from theater who he was convinced was gay. Some of my closest friends, even people in my youth group, were self-professed bisexuals. My aunt came out as a lesbian in 2010 and then promptly moved to Finland. You know, maybe she was onto something. And when I rediscovered many of my old high school journals as an adult, I unearthed some baby bisexual yearning myself. More on that later. Now, what do all of these queers have in common? The guy from theater, my friends from youth group, my aunt, and now me. We're all artists. Artists who live creatively. The guy from theater is well self-explanatory. My friends from youth group were a visual artist and a singer, respectively. My aunt is a fantastic trumpet player. And me? Well, I'm a novelist, visual artist sometimes. At the risk of playing on stereotypes, men involved in activities like choir, theater, and art are more likely to be called gay as a pejorative, regardless of whether or not they actually are. But it reveals a trend. Why did all the weird, read queer, kids hang out in the cool English teacher's classroom during lunch? Why did a boy from my high school in choir wear magenta stilettos at 8 a.m. every day? Why did one of my friends from art class, a brilliant sculptor, come out as trans in college? Why, by comparison, did all of the other popular, normal kids from my school stay so painfully straight in every sense of the word? When looking back at my graduating class, who were all 24 to 26 now, a large percentage of the art kids, choir kids, and theater kids are now some flavor of LGBTQ, me and my musician partner included. And the kids involved in sports, STEM, and student council are still just as straight-laced and socially acceptable as they were at 16. To widen the scope, think about how many celebrities, who are in effect professional millionaire artists, are visibly and colorfully queer. There are the obvious ones like Ellen, Freddie Mercury, Lady Gaga, George Michael, to name a contemporary few, but there are the great legends like writers Oscar Wilde and Truman Capote, visual artists like Frida Kahlo and Andy Warhol, and sapphic singer Maxine Andrews of the Andrews Sisters, and many more, both throughout history and today. Now, a quick disclaimer for the YouTube commenters. I realize that I am painting with a broad brush here. This is not to say that everyone who makes a life out of being creative is queer. This is not to say that people who conform to normative gender and sexuality standards cannot be gay or creative, right? This is also not to say that cis heteros can't be creative either. In fact, many of them are. Anyone can be queer just as anyone can be creative. But why does this stereotyping exist? Why are so many gay icons artists? Why are so many artists gender non-conforming? Is there a hidden link between queerness and artistic expression. And the central question of this video, why is good art always so, well, gay? And historians will call them roommates. Shakespeare. In order to get my English degree, I had to take an entire course dedicated to William Shakespeare. I mean, it makes sense. As much as high school juniors labor over the antiquated language of Macbeth and wider society ridicules Romeo and Juliet for being foolish teenagers, there has never been a writer that has left such an impact on the English storytelling canon than one William Shakespeare. Retellings of Shakespeare's famous works are never in short supply. We all know that The Lion King is just Hamlet. That one zombie romance featuring Nicholas Hoult, Romeo and Juliet. 10 Things I Hate About You is just the plot of Taming of the Shrew. In this Shakespeare class, we spent almost an entire week talking about the popular theory that Shakespeare was gay. Or, at the very least, bisexual. In Shakespeare's day, all on-stage roles were played by men. Juliet and all female characters would have been prepubescent or teenage boys. And there's no shortage of romance and sex in Shakespeare's work. Meaning that these male actors were on stage, some dressing as women, falling in love with and kissing other men. Don't you think that's kinda gay? We also read a good selection of Shakespeare's sonnets that refer to the fair youth and contain bawdy, heterosexual, and homosexual puns. Some scholars believe that a more plausible explanation to this is intense platonic friendship or deep admiration. But, hey man, love is love. More on that later. Point being, the groundwork is there. Like it or not, both the in-text content of Shakespeare's work and the Elizabethan theatrical context surrounding it is queer-coded, if not explicitly queer. Does it really matter if Shakespeare was or wasn't English language lit's first bi icon? No, especially considering he'll never be able to tell us. But the fact of the matter is, Shakespeare's work is widely considered and read as queer in both a sexuality and a gender sense. Shakespeare was both acting on, codifying, and pushing the boundaries of his day. There's no heterosexual explanation for this. Queer coding. So, my partner and I are huge fans of the popular anime Naruto. And if you know anything about Naruto besides the Naruto running in Area 51 memes from the past years, you probably know how fucking gay Naruto and Sasuke are for each other. There's just no heterosexual explanation for this. Or this. Or this. But Naruto and Sasuke are canonically heterosexual. Naruto is married to Hinata, and Sasuke is married to Sakura, and they both have kids together. That is in the text explicitly. So then why does the narrative, its implications, and the wider fan base have such a strong bisexual/gay headcanon for the two male leads, and for all of Team 7 for that matter? Why is Naruto, and plenty of other fiction, so queer-coded, especially when it's not trying to be? Queer coding is the attribution of stereotypically queer traits to a character without the narrative explicitly stating any specific gender or sexual identity. A good example of this is the recent headcanon that the Spider-Verse version of Gwen Stacy is transgender. And there's good textual evidence for this. Gwen has a Protect Trans Kids poster in her room. Her father has a transgender pride flag on his uniform. Gwen Stacy's flashback scenes in Across the Spider-Verse are bathed in vibrant pinks and baby blues, colors of the trans pride flag. While the narrative nor the characters ever state that Gwen Stacy is cis or trans, the evidence is there for you to notice. Or not notice. Gwen Stacy is transgender if you want her to be. She's transgender if you're paying attention. So queerness is coded into lots of art and has been across history. It unfortunately has a negative connotation, with the most significant and prominent examples being Disney villains like Ursula, Scar, Radcliffe, and Hades. But queer coding can actually be really cool and interesting, especially in a world that has historically condemned homosexuality and gender deviance. Another great example of positive queer coding is Marvel's X-Men, a personal favorite. While intentionally created to mirror the civil rights movement in the US, there's a great and likely also intentional metaphor for queerness wrapped up in there. The X-Men gain their powers from genetic mutations that often arise during puberty. They are ostracized from society, unlike the Avengers, who are praised, and are forced to hide or adapt. Not only are the X-Men in general a great allegory for any sort of otherness, two of the most famous characters in the franchise are locked in a perpetual bromance. Professor X, Charles Xavier, and Magneto, Eric Lehnsherr, much like Naruto and Sasuke, represent two sides of the same ideological coin. They're best friends and also the worst of enemies. Their friendship is intense, pathological, and dramatic. Much more compelling than any of the romances that the movies try to shoulder onto James McAvoy's Charles Xavier. Are they lovers? Worse. I think that this theme of the two leading male characters in particular having lots of unintended romantic chemistry is an unfortunate consequence of sexism. Historically, writing in the entertainment industry has been male-dominated, and female-centric stories and elevating female authors is, relatively speaking, a new thing. I think that Naruto as a franchise in particular suffers from this. By a large margin, Naruto and Sasuke are the most developed and complex characters in the series. I love Sakura, I really do, I will go to bat for her, but she is still emblematic of an insecure male writer who feels like he doesn't know how to write women and therefore does not try at all. When characters like Naruto and Sasuke are consistently paired as opposing forces who just can't seem to stay away from each other, well, that's just prime breeding grounds for good shipping dynamics. Speaking of shipping, if you spend any amount of time online in fan spaces, you'll come to notice that some of the most popular ships, short for relationships for the uninitiated, are some flavor of queer or polyamorous. And millions of words of fan fiction are written about this. Fandom and its shipping culture are notoriously gay, and oftentimes fandom is something that spawns more creativity in the form of transformative works like fan fiction, fan art, and cosplay. This is creativity, even if it is derivative. More importantly, it is self-expression, which in my opinion is the intersection between creativity and queerness. But why is this the case when the canon of the text specifies that many of these characters are straight and cis? Why is that subtext even there in the first place? Artists often have to be covert and, well, creative about what they're trying to say and the point that they're trying to get across. Sometimes they don't even know what they're trying to say until they've already said it. Otherwise, if they're not sort of covert about it, it's not really art. It's not a story. You're just telling us what you think about something. You're giving us ideas. Queerness can be a great vehicle or a veil for the truth. The role of marginalization, critical lenses. So, in case you didn't know, some of the best art comes from marginalized groups. The example most Americans will recognize is jazz, a musical style that originated with Black Americans and was eventually co-opted into wider musical society. So, now this next example is not always true, but I am going to draw attention to another stereotype. The idea of the mentally ill, tortured, mad artist. That in order to make good art, you have to be, well, damaged in some way. The science is divided on whether this is mere correlation or meaningful causation, but I think it's grounded in some kind of reality. Many great artists are marginalized in some way, whether they're queer or women or BIPOC or neurodivergent, disabled, abused, traumatized, or mentally ill. As someone who identifies with many of those things on the previous list, I do think that good art requires some kind of marginalization in order to be meaningful and impactful on a wider audience. Artists, all of them, draw from a source of pain, but we transform that pain into beauty and share that with others. That's kind of the whole shtick, right? So whether it's the pain of being queer or the pain of being some kind of racial outgroup, the pain of being depressed, or the pain of being beaten by your alcoholic father, all of that pain is good, fertile soil for art to arise, for healing through art to take root in the artist and their audience. I'd also say that most art is about marginalized people, stories and main characters at least. In the video game The Last of Us, Joel, for all intents and purposes, is a straight white man, but he is marginalized by his grief. Ellie is marginalized by being the only person immune from the fungus. And, well, also being gay. Shrek is an ogre. Naruto is a vessel for a demon. Hendrix is antisocial. Katniss is from District 12. It's simply more interesting that way, having a protagonist who is othered. Reading about and watching Joe Schmoes is only interesting if something interesting happens to that Joe Schmo. So a lot of good art is gay because these marginalizations have a lot more in common than people like to think. Art is by nature fluid and often ambiguous, meaning that one art piece can have multiple layered analyses and meanings depending on what lens you decide to use to analyze the work. It's like the X-Men. The creator intended it to reflect a very specific time in history, but it's not necessarily wrong if you want to analyze it through any number of critical lenses. Good art can be and should be looked at from multiple angles. But that means the art itself has got to be queer, weird, boundary-breaking, ambiguous, and complex first. Why straight art becomes gay? 3 theories. I would argue that good art, all art, is just that. Weird, boundary-breaking, ambiguous, and complex. Art is meant to make us feel something, to inspire action and change, to put our lives under a microscope so that we can learn and grow. There's that famous quote by Dr. Cesare Cruz: "Art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable." Art should shake things up when things need changing, but it should also provide safety and comfort when things are unstable. It does and can do both. So then how does art created by straight people with straight intentions become so queer-coded? Masashi Kishimoto, Naruto's mangaka, has a wife and son. Granted, this doesn't have any bearing on whether someone's queer or not, but one has to wonder. Why is there so much underlying romantic tension in Naruto? Why is shipping culture so gay and poly? Why is Shakespeare so historically and presently queer? Now, this is the part of the video where I start dipping my toes into speculation. This is when I might need your help in the comments with your thoughts, experiences, and theories. But I have 3 that I'd like to present for you today, why I think that so much of straight art veers into queer territory. My first explanation is always, unfortunately, misogyny. This is the explanation that I have for art that is written by men, for men, and happens to be implicitly yaoi, or art involving male homosexual, homoerotic, and homoromantic relationships for the uninitiated. Historically, women have been barred from pretty much every space you can think of, and that includes all forms of artistic expression. Remember when I said that in Shakespeare's day, women were not allowed to be actors? So art has had a long and homosexual history. Women were barred from so many of these spaces, from writing to painting to sculpting to theater, that the arts almost became a male echo chamber. That sort of artistic affection for other men became normalized. It's just art, bro. It's not gay. In the case of Naruto, I think it's twofold. Kishimoto's lack of writing skills and shonen genre conventions. Kishimoto himself has admitted that he does not feel confident writing female characters, which is a total fucking cop-out in my opinion. Usually when I hear male writers say this, they follow it up with something along the lines of, "Oh, I just can't relate to women," or "Oh, they're so complicated, I don't think I could write one very well," which just means to me that you don't have enough women in your life and you don't know how to empathize with them as human beings. Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints talks about, in her video on Twilight, about why so many female writers write yaoi, male-male romance, or write from male perspectives when men themselves shirk away from placing themselves in women's shoes. Wynn says that this is because women tend to be fluent in adopting a masculine perspective, because art, even still, is so full of male artists, singers, directors, and writers. Therefore, women are sort of forced to empathize with whatever we see on screen. Due to art's long-standing male-centrism, men haven't been taught how to empathize with women in art, so therefore they choose male subjects instead to focus their creative energies on. There's also the matter of genre when it comes to Naruto specifically. Naruto is a shonen and a manga, meaning that it's aimed toward adolescent boys. So if Kishimoto had made the central relationship of Naruto a male-female romance, well, that's too girly for me. That's shoujo. There will be no well-developed romances in my battle manga. By the demands and conventions of the genre, Sasuke had to be a boy and Naruto's rival, not his lover. This too applies to the superhero genre because superheroes are for boys, duh. Point being, misogyny has entrenched itself so deeply into narrative art that it's almost impossible to separate. By this logic, art has to be both created by men and be about men, which means that you're going to end up with a lot of deep, intimate friendships that are more well-developed than most romances. I'm looking at you, Stucky. Now, this next one might be a little controversial, but I think that a lot of straight art veers into the queer because of the artist's own lack of self-awareness. Fellow gay artists here in the chat, have you ever created something and been like, damn, where did that come from? I have, and it happens a lot more than you might think. Good art should surprise both the artist and the audience, because much of the process of art relies on the subconscious. It relies on instinct, emotion, repression, and expression. And when we let all of that gunk out of us in song or dance or paint or words, we can be quite surprised by what we find. So my theory is that some of this straight art gets unintentionally queer-coded by its own artist, because perhaps there are maybe things that this artist has yet to realize. Now, I think that speculating about other people's sexuality and gender is a no-no, and I won't be speculating about anyone here. We'll just take a close look at yours truly. Earlier in this video, I mentioned rediscovering old journals from high school that contained a suspicious amount of bisexual yearning. In this one particular journal entry, I lament about my bad luck with boys and the sapphic yearning that came in response to that. Dated August 26th, 2016, my junior year of high school. Names changed for privacy. I feel like I can never make it work, that any relationship that I have with a boy will go down in flames. And because of the influence of the 100s, Clexa, and Sophia and Kristen's bisexual perversion, and my close relationship with Heather, I think that things might work out better with girls. And then I go on to berate myself with the homophobic thought control techniques I was taught in the church. Not a cute look. This was one of my first journal entries ever. I would go on to fill 9 journals, cataloging my life with prayers and rants, poetry, and creative nonfiction. My point in sharing this is that by journaling, I committed myself to the craft of writing. I kept soul searching. I kept looking inward. I kept writing, kept discovering, kept creating all throughout those years. And look where it's led me. Towards a life and a self that is more whole and integrated. The intersection of my creativity and my queerness only exists because I've spent so much time, well, navel-gazing. So then perhaps all this straight art is made by people in the closet who aren't ready to come out yet, or who haven't realized that truth about themselves yet. And that's okay. The idea is that their art will hopefully lead them into a more whole and healed version of themselves. My last theory is probably the most charitable. It's that, well, love is love. The ancient Greeks had 6 main words for love. English only has 1. While I have such deep admiration for the English language, it certainly has its constraints. These 6 Greek words describe the many different forms that love can take. Unconditional, sexual, brotherly, familial, self-love, and hospitable love. Very roughly speaking. These are all the different types of love that we can have for each other, not even considering the other ways in English that we use the word love, right? It's also very common to have different types of love for the same person. I've been with my partner for 6 years, but we've known each other for 14. Him and I were friends first. But since we're also partners, we have romantic and sexual love for each other. That's 3 different types of love that describes one relationship. All this to say, love transcends boundaries. That's like what it's for. It's supposed to be all-encompassing, shame-negating, and community-building. Love has lines, certainly, but many of those lines are blurred, depending on the type of relationship that you're dealing with. And so when artists depict love in its many forms, whether that's in a book, poem, painting, sculpture, or movie, they're attempting to depict love as it exists in the real world. Why do you think the trope of friends to lovers is so popular? Because close friendship and romantic love have quite a significant overlap. Friendship and familial love also have overlap too. Additionally, all forms of love have overlap with our concepts of God and the divine. Consider all the ways that the Christian God's love gets personified in the Bible. He is depicted as a father figure in most of the Old Testament, but also as a lover in Song of Solomon. Jesus is a friend and a shepherd. He shared brotherly love with the disciples. In the New Testament, the Christian church is referred to as the bride of Christ, making the metaphor that every Christian is going to marry Jesus. Aside from how strange that might sound, the point being is that love is by nature wibbly-wobbly, fluid and everlasting, and always changing, all-consuming. So it makes sense that when 2 characters are depicted as having a deep, intense love that transcends boundaries, there are a myriad of ways that this love can be interpreted by an audience. One of those ways is romantic and sexual and, well, gay. What art requires of the artist? The art tax. I wrote my first novel when I was 13 in the 8th grade. It was for a school assignment, and it only had to be about 10 pages long. I ended up writing about 250. This book, which will never see the light of day, by the way, featured 2 male point of view characters. My next novel, that ended up being my debut, featured another male point of view. My sophomore novel, Casually Homicidal, is primarily about a teenage boy. All this to say, I've never had trouble writing from the point of view of men. A good writer knows that all you really have to do is just write them as human. Everything else is just set dressing. Going back to ContraPoints' video on Twilight, Wynne connects the idea of women writers writing yaoi, or identifying with a male perspective, with the eponymous YA paranormal romance series where Twilight functions as a sort of sexual power fantasy, where readers identify both with Bella and Edward, with the feminine and the masculine. This reveals a level of underlying gender nonconformity, at least for me. Being able to write men so fluidly was one of the first clues of my own queerness. My creativity and my humanness is not simply limited to women or femininity or heterosexuality. My creativity, well, makes me queer. I identify as bisexual, and like those damning journal entries from high school, the seeds of my queerness were always there. It just wasn't always safe to express or even understand them, considering the way that I was raised. Aside from having a deeply supportive, also bisexual partner, I believe that it was through art that I also came to acknowledge and understand what it meant to be a bisexual woman, both from a sex and a gender perspective. Writing men meant that I had to tap into my own masculinity and my own attraction to women. One of my recently published pieces in the anthology Writing Out Our 20s is retrospective creative nonfiction about how I was always, well, a little fruity. And when Morrowind and Roland, the 2 main characters of my adult high fantasy work in progress, showed up on the doorstep of my creative process as deeply and unabashedly bisexual, I couldn't deny it anymore. It was a combination of a loving, creative, and queer partner, and a dedication to my own creative process that allowed me to be liberated enough as a person to be comfortable in my sexuality. But why the creative process specifically? There are plenty of ways to discover oneself. What is it about creativity that makes such flamboyant gaze and such good, enduring, authentic art? If you ever created something, written a book, produced a short film, painted a landscape or a portrait, then you know that while creativity is an outpouring of what's inside of you onto a physical medium, that art also requires something of you. In order to create good, fulfilling, rich art, you have to pay what I'm going to call the art tax. I define this art tax as the price that you, the artist, have to pay in order to draw the artwork out of you. It's not a literal cash payment, and it's not always something negative. But in order to create, you have to give up something. You have to let go of control, of preconceived notions. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be raw, messy, and honest. You have to look at yourself head on and your life. And that's some of the hardest work we'll ever do. Most of the time, I don't want to do it. Many people never do this work. Writing forces me to be honest with myself, to confront my own ugly feelings and the patterns in my life that have wreaked such havoc. Writing forces me to look inward, and it forces me to test the limits of my own boundaries and to break them entirely. That's the art tax. But that's the whole point of art, right? To be subversive, to say something true, authentic, and real, to tell a story, to break new ground, to innovate, and to take what the human race has done and add your own voice to the endless chorus. To shed the shackles of our real, abysmal, and difficult lives, and to dream in full technicolor. Art inherently makes one introspective, and art inherently transverses boundaries. Is that not what being queer is, too? Finally looking inward at those feelings you've had for most of your life and finally being fucking honest about it? Pushing the boundaries of gender and sexuality? Breaking out of societal expectations for you and your life? People whose hobbies involve looking inward in the way that art requires of its artist are often going to discover and rediscover their true selves. But those of us in the human race who do not regularly engage with their creative instinct in meaningful ways don't have that free-flowing creative outlet that allows them to tap into their true self, their perhaps queer self. And when you know who you are better, you find what boundaries you want to push, to bend, accept, or disregard entirely. Art requires pushing boundaries, being authentic, and exploring yourself, and so does queerness. In a world that values practicality, self-denial, efficiency, and capitalistic gain, it takes a lot of courage to be an artist. And it also takes a lot of courage to be yourself. Conclusion. Not only is there a historical precedent for art being inextricably intertwined with queer identity, the relationship between queerness and creativity is more visible than ever. Artists, we're not just weird, we're queer. And we ought to be proud of that. There are plenty of examples in art and fiction that exemplify the underlying connection between creativity and queer identity, beginning with Shakespeare's sex and genderqueer legacy to modern representation like Alice Oseman's Heartstopper. Art, fiction, and creativity have always been safe spaces for queer people. From covert representation like Spider vs. Gwen Stacy to prolific headcanons like Gravity Falls Dipper Pines, from comic book artists creating fictional metaphors to Japanese mangakas unintentionally writing the best bisexual polycule ever, art, and for my purposes fiction, has always been a way for queer people to not only express themselves, but to understand themselves. It makes sense then that this would bleed into the things that we create, both intentionally and unintentionally. There's a lot of overlap between being an artist and being queer. Self-expression, authenticity, and pushing boundaries. And I'd argue that that's why even so much straight art is still queer in the loosest sense of the word. It involves the same amount of liberation that being queer does. Art is the process by which we become free and become whole. And that process requires a lot of hard work, a lot of introspection, and a lot of dedication. On the creative path, you'll end up finding out a lot more about yourself than you ever anticipated, and some of what you find out about yourself is deviant, distasteful, uncomfortable, and even scary. But art, from music to paintings to photographs to novels to films, is designed to make us less afraid of all of that. Well, if you've made it this far, congratulations and thank you. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm an author, editor, and art teacher, and I guess now aspiring YouTuber. I've been watching video essays pretty much my whole conscious life, and I have always admired the artistry of it, and I also feel like I have a lot to say as a writer, so I guess I'm going to try this thing out. Hopefully the quality of these will get better as I get better at this whole video making process. I think I've got the script writing down though. I hope you'll join me.